Okay, welcome to episode 18 of the Total Hockey Training Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Scahan. And before I introduce my next guest, I just want to remind everybody our Train Heroic postseason program is going on right now, 3 days a week. You can sign up at trainheroic.com, search for Total Hockey Training. And now I want to introduce my next guest. And people who know me personally are probably thinking, why hasn't this guy been on before? But hey, today's your lucky day. My guest is Mike Boyle. Mike is a longtime strength and conditioning coach. He has been doing this for 30 plus years, founder of Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. He has been the hockey strength and conditioning coach at Boston University, where he won a few national championships and also the Boston Red Sox World Series victory, which I was lucky to be at that game, which was pretty cool. But most importantly, Mike is one of the big reasons why I'm sitting in front of you guys today. He's a mentor, a friend, and we're lucky to have him on the show. Mike, good to see you. Thanks for coming on, pal.
Thanks for having me. I always say I love doing these. It's a great opportunity. It's even better with you because I'm catching up with somebody that I don't get to talk to enough. Sometimes I'm talking to people I don't really know, which isn't as much fun, but this will be lots of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of listeners probably know who you are through the strength and conditioning circle. And people back home, they probably want to know who the guy is who helped me out so much. And I've heard everything. I've heard your background and everything, but like tell people at back home, whether it's Boston, Quincy, wherever, how a guy from Malden has come up and done all that you've done for the field.
Well, sometimes I don't know how I've done it. One, you took a couple of years off me, which is good. I'm at 42 years, believe it or
Oh my
not, which is
God, sorry.
insane. But honest to God, some of it, there's all kinds of cliches about sort of the intersection of luck and hard work. I was talking to somebody the other night. I got a job at Boston University, and I got a job at Boston University because my father knew the athletic director. So the good old way to get a job, right? Who do you know?
Mhm.
And my father and the athletic director, John Simpson, at that time had played football together at BU during kind of the BU heyday in the late 50s post-war. And I got there as an athletic trainer, and I realized relatively quickly that I didn't want to be an athletic trainer, that I didn't like it. I didn't like it in college as much as I'd liked it at Springfield College, where I'd studied athletic training. But at the same time, strength and conditioning didn't really exist. And that's what I think is hard for people now to realize, is that in 1982 or probably 83, when I very first started at BU, there were no strength and conditioning coaches in New England. Not one school had one. And I just kind of had this, I guess, dream or harebrained idea that I was going to be the strength and conditioning coach at Boston University. And so I quit my athletic training job. I just went to Maria Hudzik, who has since passed away, sadly, a wonderful woman,
Yeah.
and said, I'm resigning and I'm going to basically go across the hall and like set up shop and be the strength coach. I think now if you told somebody that you're doing that, they'd be like, that's the most insane plan in history. But somehow for me, it seemed pretty logical, and I thought I could pull it off. I literally went across the hall, the weight room. We had a little 600 square foot weight room that was across the hall from the training room. We had a couple of Nautilus machines and 2 racks and 2 benches. And I kind of went in and was just sitting around. When people came in, I'm like, I'm here. I'm the strength coach, which seems really stupid at this point in time. But I can still remember sitting in there with Rick Pitino. Pitino was a basketball coach, and talking to Pitino about strength and conditioning. And he was excited, but he was so excited he left before I ever really got the ball rolling with basketball, because he went, I think, to Providence at that time. That was probably his first big move. And a guy named John Kuster, who has since gone on to be a pretty good NBA coach himself, he took over as the basketball coach, and he hired me to run the basketball preseason program. And he said, "Well, you've run a preseason program for us." And I was like, "Absolutely. This is what I've been waiting for, is for somebody to actually hire me." And then Ben Smith saw what basketball was doing, or what I was doing with basketball, and his feeling was we need to do this with hockey. And so he approached Coach Parker, and everybody was kind of chipping in a little bit of money, a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there, just so I could kind of get paid for the hours that I was showing up. But what I really wanted to be was a football strength coach, which is the funny part.
Mhm.
So I went to Tim Murphy, and Murph just retired at Harvard after a
Yeah.
incredible career at Harvard. But Tim had gone to Springfield with me. He's a couple of years older than I was and had gone to Springfield with me. And I went to him and pitched him this idea of running the football offseason program. And he shut me down the first time around. And I had to go back to him and say, Murph, this is stupid. You're doing it because I'd watched them do it with the football coaches. The coaches themselves were trying to supervise it when they were not on the road recruiting. Somebody would stay back and watch the weight room. And I just told him, I said, Murph, I understand what's going on. And hey, I can lift. I'll be here every day. You don't have to pay me. You just got to get, at that time, Rick Taylor, who was not one of my favorite people I've ever worked for in my life, but he convinced Rick Taylor to let me do it. And suddenly I was the de facto strength coach for football, basketball, and hockey at Boston University.
It's awesome. That's great. And yeah, I remember like, I mean, BU had that Robert Doherty, right? That little quarterback
Yeah. Oh,
football
yeah.
player. Yeah, he was good. I remember that was probably mid 90s, right?
That was late 90s. He was the last 2 of the last 3 years we had football. Basically, we had football one more year because Robert Doherty was so good. If
Yeah.
Robert Doherty had been so good, we might have dropped it a year sooner, but we ended up going to the one AA playoffs. It had a great. We actually, people don't remember this, but we beat Northern Iowa, or Boston University beat Northern Iowa when Kurt Warner was the quarterback for Northern Iowa.
I remember that. I remember that because I was still a high school football player then. And I remember that it was in that dome, right? In Iowa, if I'm not mistaken.
No, we beat them at home actually, and then we had went out to Idaho State, either Idaho or Idaho State, one of those dome games, and we
Yeah.
lost out there in the dome, and probably I guess that would have. I don't know if that would have put us in the one AA national championship game or if that was a game to go to the Final Four. I forget. It was so long ago. I was talking to one of our football players the other day about all this stuff, and he is actually trying to write a book about that time period, and I was amazed how much of it I have kind of juxtaposed. I can't remember who was on which team with who, and
Yeah.
it gets a little complicated.
So that's pretty neat. And so I think you ended up like when I was interning at BU, football had just ended like the fall before. And is that when you transitioned to running your company full time? I think it was because you were
It
only
was
doing
funny.
hockey.
It was just slightly before I did it. I left going into the last year of football. I think the last year of football was maybe 97. And in 97, I opened my business. So I kind of transitioned from the full-time head strength coach to a part-time position, kind of a part-time, full-time. Glenn took over really
Hmm.
most of the operation stuff. And then at that time, I just did hockey, but I kept doing hockey for another 12, 14 more years.
Yeah,
And
remember that.
we
Well, I
had
want to
some,
talk about obviously this is a hockey training podcast, and my kind of what's that ignition, I guess, for me was back on TV seeing you working with Cam Neely, and I mean anyone growing up in Boston knows about Cam Neely and the injuries that he had and he had to deal with, and you were on TV with him. Like, oh, that looks like a pretty cool job, to be honest with you. Talk about that rehab process if you could, and what went into that and all of that.
yeah, it was really interesting actually, because when I got, so this again, this is like a strength and conditioning history course, but uh, at that time, I wasn't making a whole lot of money at BU. So BU basically let me work for the Bruins at the same time. So I would go and work for the Bruins in the morning, and then I would open the BU weight room up from 12 to 7. And then at 7, I would drive back to the Garden when there were games, and I'd work with the Bruins guys, either the injured guys during the games or guys that played after games. So it was just kind of a different world then. But the other thing that was different is when I first got to the Bruins, Neely was the next guy who was going to have his career ruined by a knee injury. So he was the next Bobby Orr, the next Gord Kluzak. All you heard about, almost like it was a curse in terms of, wow, we get these great players and then they hurt their knees and suddenly they can't play again and they're never the same. And I think I'm just dumb, truthfully. Sometimes I just don't I don't get intimidated by situations that maybe I should have been intimidated by, but I looked at this and thought, this is an amazing opportunity. If I can get this guy healthy, this is going to be huge. Like this
Mhm.
guy, because I mean, you were a kid growing up at that time. He was Tom Brady. He was Larry Bird.
Yeah.
He was the guy in Boston sports at that time. I always joke that he was the guy, like your sister wanted to date him, your mother wanted to meet him, your brother wanted to be him. You know what I mean? It was just
Yeah.
like he was that person because he played the game with a
Oh, he's tough
ferocity
too.
that was
Yeah.
just unparalleled. He could score and he could beat the piss out of people.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, the consummate Bruin in terms of you got this guy who is scoring like Phil Esposito and fighting like Terry O'Reilly, and you think, what could be better than this guy? And then suddenly, wow, he's got this knee injury, and what he actually had was interesting. He had a myositis ossificans, so he had a piece of bone in his leg from a couple of hits in the playoffs, and that was the whole Alf Samuelson thing.
Hmm.
But that ended up throwing all his knee mechanics off, so he started to have just this weird patellofemoral syndrome, and that was honestly, I told this story the other day in a podcast, but it was kind of the birth of functional training for me because I got there and I remember Scott Waugh, I think, was our physical therapist, who's still the physical therapist now.
Hmm.
And I remember Scott talking about him having a patellofemoral joint problem. And you're going to laugh at this, but I remember sitting there thinking, this is a patellofemoral joint? I was kind of like, I know there's a knee. And so I really started, I always thought I knew a lot then, but then I really started to study. I'm thinking, okay, I really don't know what's going on here very much in the rehab world. So I started looking at this, okay, patellofemoral joint thing, and Scott was talking about his trochlea groove is all hacked up. And I'm thinking, okay, trochlea groove, I'm going back and getting my Grey's Anatomy out and I'm looking at the knee. But what that led me to was Gary Gray,
Hmm.
because I talked to some people and I said, all right, I got this weird knee injury. The guy's not getting better. He's got these, it's just two steps forward, one steps back, a lot of recurrent swelling. And somebody said, you really got to talk to this guy, Gary Gray in Adrian, Michigan. And somebody gave me his phone number and I called Gary Gray on the phone. Cause again, think about that was the way that we did it at that time. We couldn't do what we're doing right now. And Gary was amazing with me. But again, blew my mind just talking about function and the patellofemoral joint and how the patella doesn't track and how the patella is a train on a track and you really got to worry about the track and not the train. And I remember I'm sitting there and my head is absolutely spinning and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm just nodding on the phone going, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking, I don't have any idea what this guy's talking about. I am so freaking lost and it's not even funny. And so I just, like an idiot again, I realized, okay, where's the next Gary Gray course? And it was in Phoenix, and I got my credit card out, which I must have had one at that point in time, but it probably didn't have much of a limit on it. And I said to Cindy, hey, want to go to Phoenix for a couple days? And we hopped in a plane and went to Phoenix and got a hotel. And I went to When the Foot Hits the Ground course. And Gary Gray, I thought he'd blow my mind before, but I sat in there and I just was thinking, oh my God, I don't know anything. This is crazy. Because he started talking about this whole idea of functional training
Hmm.
and about what the muscles really do. And I don't know if he used the term dead person anatomy, but he basically was talking about anatomy the way you learned it in school is just fiction. This is not how the muscles work. Your quads don't extend your knee, your hamstrings don't flex your knee. It's just not that way. And then he started talking about function and how when you put your foot on the ground, and that was the whole point of the course, you put your foot on the ground, every muscle in your lower body acts the same way. They all act eccentrically to prevent flexion of your ankle, knee, and hip. And I remember sitting there like this, scratching my head, thinking, he's right. This is crazy. And then he said, and it's really simple. When you push off, all the muscles act together again to create extension. He said, so forget plantar flexors and dorsiflexors and knee flexors and knee extensors. He said, forget all that stuff and think about function. And I just kind of sat there and thought, oh my God, this guy just opened up
Yeah.
a whole new world. And so I went back. I went and I junked all of uh, our old machines. I got rid of our leg press. I got rid of our leg extension. I got rid of our leg curl. I said, okay, this doesn't make any sense anymore. This guy, I remember thinking, this guy's got it all figured out. And then I went to Cam and I said, hey, I got some ideas here. And we're going to start playing around with these ideas. And we started playing around with different kind of variations of one leg squats. We scrapped a lot of the stuff that they were doing. And it was interesting because during that time we were transitioning between physical therapists. Our physical therapist, I think maybe Scott had left and a new guy had come in. But in either case, I'm kind of in charge of the rehab at this point, because mainly because everyone thought he's all done. And what are we gonna, we got other guys, we got healthy guys to worry about. They had all these other guys, you know, they had one trainer then and one physical therapist and a whole team full of guys, and then this one guy who sometimes they'd just be like, you know, you take him for an hour if you can during practice. And so I would just take him during practice, and we'd ride the bike. We rode the bike with one leg. I finally got him to start lifting weights, which he didn't like to do, and started playing around with knee rehab ideas. But then we started to have some success, started to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he started to feel better, and he started thinking, well, I'm listening to Mike, I'm not listening to these other guys. And that started to cause a little bit of a rift.
Absolutely.
Because our new PT guy came in and said, well, you know, knee problem, we need a Cybex test. We got to get a Cybex test. We got to figure out his quad hamstring ratio. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And he looked at me, he said, yes, we are. And I said, okay. I said, because at that time, and Camp's still like, he's the alpha male in the room at any time. And I just said, go ask him. And I'm sitting right there. And he just looks at me, and I said, nope, but I don't think you should do it. And he just looked at them. He said, sorry. Mike says, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And the guy was like, well, you have to do it. And he was like, no, he said, you don't get it. I don't have to do anything. He said, I'm listening to him. I'm getting better. I'm not listening to you. And I thought one day we had to go in with the doctors and with Harry Sinden. And I remember saying to Cam, I'm like, Cam, I'm all done. After today, you're on your own, because I'm getting fired here in about 10 minutes. And we went in, and he said the same thing to Harry. He was like, he said, I believe in this guy. I'm getting better. And he said, he said to me, he goes, I'm going to pay you myself if they fire you. He said, if they fire you, he said, I will pay you for as long as I have to pay you to do my rehab. And I'll just do my rehab. And he told them that. He said, I'll just do my rehab with him if he's not here. So I'm kind of sitting there thinking, oh, I may survive. This might be the first firing that I've survived, probably many to come. But I got through that day, and he got better, and he came back and he played. But sorry, I'm giving you a really long answer to a short question. But
I love this.
one of the things that he said was, because, I mean, he knew I wasn't making a lot of money. So one, he took great care of me all the time. He actually gave me a car. When he won the 7th player award, gave me the car.
Oh shit. Wow.
Yeah. So it was the bad part. It was the worst car probably they ever won in the history of the 7th player award. It was a Dodge Neon. They were trying to advertise the Dodge Neon, which was kind of a little kind of subcompact kind of car. And right at that time, I had just gone out and replaced my trucks. I used to drive this shitbox Toyota pickup truck. And I told Cam, I said, yeah, I just bought a new Nissan pickup, brand new Nissan pickup. And he's like, you can't, you got to take it back. I'm like, what do you mean I got to take it back? I can't take back a car. And he's like, have you picked it up yet? And I'm like, no. He said, just go tell him you don't want it. And I'm looking, I'm like, why am I going to tell him I don't want the car? He said, I've been making arrangements to give you the Neon. He said, but I'm trying to figure out how. So what he did, he basically got the Dodge dealer to credit me the price of the Neon towards a Dodge pickup at that time.
Okay.
That was the Dodge Durango. But let's say, I got a $15,000 pickup for $5,000 or something, because they put $10,000.
Yeah.
The
Love
price
it.
of the player award car towards my car. But I actually went in. It was really funny. There was a Nissan dealership in Woburn, not far from where our gym is now. And I went into the guy, and I said, I just got to be honest with you. I said, the strangest thing just happened. And I told him the story. And he was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And he ripped up the paperwork and threw it in the trash.
That is cool.
Guy was a big Bruins fan. It's like, I'm a huge Bruins fan. I can't believe you're getting Cam Neely back, and he's maybe going to play again, and blah blah blah. They threw the paperwork away, and they gave me my deposit check back, and
That's
I
awesome.
drove to Durango for probably the next 6 or 7 years.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but he was great. But so that leads me to the video stuff. One time we were talking about it, and everybody, because he's coming back now and he's playing, and it's the biggest story in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, he literally said something like, I know you're not making a whole lot of money, he said, but I know that this will be really good for you. He said, so the same thing like he did with Harry. He said, I'm not doing any interviews if you're not there. So literally, like one time ESPN came in and they said they wanted to interview me. He said, "Yeah, you get an interview. You can film me and Mike working out, and you can talk to me and Mike." And they were like, "No, we only want to talk to you." He's like, "Okay, no interview. Thanks. See you later." And everyone's like, "Oh no, we'll talk to you and Mike." So all of a sudden, everybody in every media outlet had to include me in the story. That was just he just told people, he said, "This guy is helping me, and he's part of the story. And if you don't want the story, you don't have to take the story." He was so I mean, he was an amazing guy in that regard. I don't know if I've ever run across another athlete who kind of cared for me in the way that he did when I was a strength and conditioning coach. And you've been in the pro world for a while, right? You did it. Those guys are rare. There's not a lot of those guys
Mhm.
who really are literally looking out for the little guy. Because I mean, that time I think I was making $10,000 a year with the Bruins, and he was making $1 million.
Mhm.
But it was great because everywhere we'd go, we'd go everywhere we went. We didn't have to pay for anything because everywhere we went, people gave him stuff. I used to always look at him and think that was when I started to realize how backward the world was. I was like, you have all kinds of money, and we go someplace to eat and nobody charges you.
Yeah.
I said, I don't have any money. If I go in that restaurant to eat, they charge me. I said, this doesn't make any sense at all. We pulled into a parking lot one time, and the guy in the parking lot almost has a heart attack because it's Cam Neely. Like Cam pulls in front of me, and of course the guy just waves him into the parking lot, doesn't charge him. I pull in right behind him. The guy's like, $10. I literally got out of my car. I was like, give me 10. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, he did not charge you. He let you go in for free. I know he did. And he was like fanboying all over you. Said, he just charged me. Give me $10. And he like literally
That's
whipped out
awesome.
$10 out of his pocket and gave me my parking money back, which you would have done anyway. But
Yeah.
it was just a joke of everywhere we went, it was like free beer, free meals. Everybody just wanted him. They wanted to be in his orbit. That was the kind of guy that he was. And he was a lot of fun to be around too. We had a blast. We had a really good time. That was a good chapter in my life.
Yeah. That's awesome. I remember talking to I worked with Data Moats for 1 year, and he was telling me how like Cam wouldn't practice. He said that they'd be in the change room, and all of a sudden Cam would just show up and be like, "Hey Cam, what's going on?" Like, what kind of I mean, we can call it whatever we want to call it, load management.
It was load management. Maybe I
Yeah.
invented load management, but I wouldn't let him practice. We were literally on a time schedule. I remember saying you can skate for 10 minutes. And he was such a competitor and such a team guy. He was like, Mike, I can't do that. I can't go out for 10 minutes and then get off the ice. And I was like, yes, you can. I said, you're going to go out. And again, same thing. I was just stupid, I think, because the things that I did, I think if someone else was doing them now, I'd be like, don't try that. You're not going to get away with that. I would
Right.
walk out to the ice and literally be like, get off. And he would skate over and look like, like a beaten dog or something. And he'd get off the ice and he'd go in and change. And I'm like, that's it. 10 minutes. That's how much we got today. We'll go 15 tomorrow, or we'll go 20. And he wouldn't play back-to-back games. I was literally making it up as I went along, but I was just thinking about what I guess now they would call load management. But I just thought, okay, we can't blow this guy up.
Hmm.
This is what's happened before. And I started to realize that it was some of the things that I started to learn, the lessons I started to learn was this guy was his own worst enemy. The reason he was in this situation was because he got an unbelievable thigh bruise getting, like leg checked by Al Samuelson, and then didn't want to stop playing. So I mean, literally went out and limped around for a couple more games in that series. I think it was probably with Pittsburgh at that time. But so I said, I can't let this guy, if I let him make decisions, he will make all the wrong ones.
Hmm.
He'll make every decision that he thinks is good for the team, and every decision that he thinks is the one that his teammates want him to make. And I thought, I can't let him have that authority. And we used to hang out. We'd hang out because we had probably a year where he didn't play and where he was probably kind of depressed. And Cindy and I, my wife and I, would go to his house and just hang out like when he didn't travel with the team.
Hmm.
We just go to his house and we'd whatever, watch the game, play Scrabble, drink beers. And I got to the point where I could really talk to him. And I just said, you suck at this. Like you're no good at taking care of yourself. So you got to trust me. I'm going to tell you what I think you should do. And I need you to fucking do, excuse my language, but I need you to do it. I need you to listen to what I want you to do because I think it will get you back to play. And that year he scored 50 goals in 47 games. It's the fastest 50 goals ever in the history of the NHL, I'm pretty sure. And he might have, had he played a full year, had he been able to play a full year, I am convinced he would have scored 65, 70 goals. He would have been on the top 10 of all time list. But that year he tore his MCL. He got hit. He got hit probably in, so 47. He played 47 games. Maybe we were at game, let's say we were at game 60 or 62 or something like that. And he tore his MCL. And I remember he was absolutely heartbroken because he just couldn't face the fact that, okay, I'm out again. And it has nothing to do with the knee problem that I've been fighting for, literally at that time, it had been years.
Wow.
So it was a process.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And I think everyone's gonna appreciate that story. One thing I want to ask about is Springfield College. I know that, you know, you were there with Mike Woysick and also the D coordinator for the Chiefs who just won the Super Bowl. But why even years later, like this, it's like a strength coach mecca. It's you get guys like Danny Nickel, who I think he worked for you, right? He went to
Yep.
Springfield College. He's a strength coach for football at Minnesota. Great guy. Guys like Todd Wright and Eric Ciano and all those guys. Like, why did Springfield College, is it probably to this day like the place to go to school to become a strength and conditioning coach?
It's literally the education. It's the type of kid that it attracts, and it's the education that they give that kid. And then it's the network. So if you look at guys, so when I was there, Mike Woysick and Rusty Jones were grad students when I was there. They ended up being the two longest tenured guys in the NFL. They both were in the NFL for probably something in the neighborhood of 25 years. And Rusty never hired a non-Springfield guy, I don't think ever, during the course of the entire time he was in the NFL. He just always felt like, I want a Springfield kid. I want a Springfield kid. Even now,
Like
Jim Arthur, who
JT
was
Allaire
his
as
old
well, right?
assistant. What?
JT Allaire from the Sabres.
Yep,
He's
JT. Yep.
yeah, right.
Yep. But Jim Arthur, who's at the Bears now, still just hired another Springfield kid, and he's continued Rusty's tradition of hiring Springfield kids. So there's a little bit of whatever incest, nepotism, something that goes into
Yeah.
that, but there's also a certain type of kid gets attracted to that school, and then that certain kid gets an amazing education because it's incredibly immersive. You get taught. I felt like I got taught to think, because one of the things about Springfield is it's not a big budget school. They don't have a lot of money. And so you were always they were always talking to you about how to figure out how to do something. And I think that carries over really strongly when you get out into the sports world and suddenly you realize, like when I was at BU, I would say the first at least 10 years, maybe the first 15 years I was there, I had no budget at all, nothing. It was beg, borrow, steal, talk to coaches about, hey, can you take this out of your budget? Can you get us this? Can we get that? Even when you worked, when I started my summer camps at BU, which I started in the early 90s, they used to let you run camps and they would charge you they used to call it a user's fee.
Mhm.
They charged you a set amount per kid per day that you had kids on campus. But what I also realized is all of the sports they called them friends groups, which were booster clubs, but at BU they called them friends groups. So
Yeah.
there was friends of hockey and friends of basketball. So I went to them and said, can I start friends of strength and conditioning? And they said yes. And so then so Sean McDonough, for instance, when Sean used to come and train,
Yeah.
he'd say, hey, what can I do for you? I'm like, yeah, just make a donation to Friends of Strength and Conditioning, and then I'll be able to use that money to buy something later on. So guys like Sean, some of those guys would give me a grand a year, a couple grand a year, whatever it was. But then I convinced them to let me put my camp users fee money into Friends of Strength and Conditioning. I said, okay, I have no problem. I'll run the camp. I said, my only stipulation is that whatever I give you guys for a user's fee goes into Friends of Strength and Conditioning so I can continue. So a lot of the old stuff in that weight room that you saw, I bought through Friends of Strength and Conditioning. I was fundraising my own money to improve the weight room.
Wow.
So it was, I guess like I said, I was somewhere between dumb and creative, and I've probably been trapped in that space my whole life.
I love that. That's awesome. And so question I want to ask you, hockey training philosophy. I know you talk about how you know, trained those players at BU, those outstanding players, and you got them faster. Talk about that. How that was a that was also a different time. Like the NHL then was, even when I started, everyone had Fitron bikes and these programs where I think Howie Wenger might have designed them, these Fitron
Yeah,
bike programs, and that was NHL strength and conditioning at the time. And
was.
if
And
you,
I
you had a
went
weight room.
very much against the grain. It's actually interesting. I went very much against the grain because, and I remember exactly what happened. We ran a mile, and the kid that won the mile was a kid that didn't play. It played very, very little for us during his entire career. And the guys that came in last were Sean McGeckran, Mike Sullivan, and Joe Sacco, who ended up being three of the fastest guys ever in the NHL. Won fastest skater competitions on multiple teams. And I just remember I'm sitting there by myself, and I'd been reading Charlie Francis stuff, and I'm just thinking about kind of the conventional 45-minute bike ride, develop your aerobic system. And then I'm thinking, all right, I have a choice to make here. And my choice is I can either train my team to be like my best players, or I can train my team to be like my worst player. My worst player was very aerobically fit. My best players were not very aerobically fit. My best players were really explosive. They were our best squatters, our best cleaners, our highest vertical jumps, our fastest tens, and our worst guys at the mile. This other guy, and I won't mention his name because I loved him. He was a great kid, but he was thin, not very strong, and he could run forever.
Mhm.
And I thought, why would I train everybody on my team to be like that versus training them all to be like this? So we just started to adopt this philosophy of no, we're going to get bigger, we're going to get faster, we're going to get stronger. And not that we're not going to worry about being in shape, but we're not going to define in shape by VO2 max. We're not going to define in shape by the performance of some long distance event. And it was funny, we went years. You could talk to Mike Sullivan now. I would bet that Mike Sullivan will tell you that every camp he ever went to, he got shit about not being in good enough shape when they did the VO2 test. He would VO2 test and maybe he'd be 48 or 50. And they'd say, Sully, you got to get your VO2 up. You got to get your VO2 up. And then he'd go out and have another great year and be the fastest guy on their team and be the guy that covered Pavel Bure every time they played
Mhm.
Vancouver. But, and then, and I used to tell our guys all the time, just get ready to go to camp and get shit for 2 days. You'll get shit for 2 days when they do the fitness testing. He said, then when the playing starts, you guys are going to be fine. And that's what happened. And our guys, and slowly people started to look and think, well, what the hell are these BU guys doing right? I mean, we were in the Final Four 9 times in 10 years in the 2000s. And we were doing things really different than everybody else was doing them. But gradually people started to look at us and think, wait a second, I know this was wrong. People used to say stuff like, don't go over to BU and train with Mike Boyle. He's going to train you like a football player. You got to lift heavy weights. It's
Mhm.
literally going to be the football program, and he's going to screw you all up. But then people started looking and thinking, all those guys who go over there supposedly to get screwed up, they're all playing in the NHL right now, and they're all making money. So one year I decided I pitched Bob Murray about the idea of training pro hockey players. I said, I need some pro hockey guys to try this program on. He said, no NHL guys. And this was at 1990. We had just played in our first Final Four, and he was sitting in the seat behind me, coming back from Detroit. And I kind of got up the courage to say, because Bob was a BU alum, and he was good friends with Coach Parker. And I said, I'm just going to pitch this idea to him. And I said, I need 5 or 6 guys who are close to being in the NHL, guys that will actually listen to me, do what I want them to do. And he looked at me, he goes, I got a bunch of guys like that. I'll get you a bunch of guys for the summer. And he got me a bunch. Tommy Fitzgerald, who's now the GM in Jersey, was one of my first clients. Kenny Hodge, who ended up making the Bruins and having a real breakout year that year after being in the minors a couple of years after leaving BC. Jeff Lazaro, who came from UNH and was not a guy they thought was going to make the Bruins. So a bunch of my guys, summer guys, all of a sudden started making teams.
Wow.
And then I had everybody, I had Harvard kids, I had BC kids, everybody started to realize, well, whatever's going on over there is working because the guys that are there in the summer are all making teams. So from there, I think other people then started to realize, okay, the old kind of, like you said, the Canadian, the Howie Wenger, the 45 minutes on the Fitron.
Mhm.
Because I always said like that stuff worked if you had Mario or you had Wayne Gretzky, you had someone like that. You could just look at them and say, well, their aerobic capacity is longer. If I can get them in better shape, they can stay on the ice longer. But I was looking at it thinking, I got to get guys that can compete with Gretzky or Mario or those guys. They're not going to be Gretzky or Mario. They got to compete with those guys. They've got to be able to be faster. They've got to be able to, because think, I mean, the game, you got to get to a loose puck.
Mhm.
You get at least a 3-to-1 rest to work ratio. When we really started to look at the game, the whole aerobic thing, I always said didn't hold a lot of water.
Mhm.
And it was being fueled primarily by GMs who were hiring exercise physiologists. And it was one of those, I always said, it was the when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail thing. Because if you hire an exercise physiologist and ask him how to get better, he's probably going to look at, I've got 2 tests. I've got a Wingate test and I've got a VO2 max test. I'm going to do those 2 tests. And then I'm going to simplistically, I'm going to look at the results. VO2s are low. So obviously, hey, we'll get better by raising those up.
Mhm.
Instead of looking and thinking, wait a second, these guys are naturally fast twitch guys. They're probably primarily anaerobic guys, maybe getting them better. Because I had guys early on that I think trained themselves out of the league because they tried to do their team summer programs. And if you were a little on the small, weak, slow side, that killed you.
Yep.
And I even had that one year, the year Ray Bork won the cup in Colorado. He came first time ever. He came the summer before he came to Winchester for the entire summer and trained because I had said to him, Ray, the thing that you're losing, I said, your aerobic capacity is off the charts. It always has been. I said, but your power output decreases every year. Look, I had the numbers from 10 years of the Bruins. I said, you never had a great vertical jump because he was 225. So his vertical jump was like 23 ish. I said, and you're creeping down 23, low 23s, high 22s. I said, we got to work on the power side of the equation. So I had him, same thing, doing lower body stuff that he'd never done, doing plyos, doing things literally that he had never done in his life, with the idea that we've got to give you back the step that you lose as you get older. And I did that later on. I had Brendan Shanahan. I had so many guys over the years. Billy Guerin came from Edmonton, and
Mhm.
he showed up at Edmonton. I remember looking at him and thinking, what is wrong with you? You were a beast
Yeah, still is.
before you went to Edmonton. He was like 45. He was like, 45 minutes on the bike, 3 days a week. But he was so skinny and he was weak. I remembered him as a guy that could bench 225 for 5 or 6 reps. And I think when I saw him that year, when he got traded to the Bruins, I don't know if he could do 225 for 1. And I thought, you got to get strong again. You got to get big. You got to be 210 pounds. And you're a power forward. This is what you are. You're not. But it was almost a kind of a broad brush, particularly with the Canadian teams where they trained everybody the same. And it was just getting better aerobic shape, getting better aerobic shape, getting better aerobic shape. We had Hal Gill one year when he was with Keenan with the Bruins, and I saw him, and he looked like a skeleton.
Mhm.
I couldn't believe he was. I mean, I had him a couple of years when he played when he went at camp at 240, and I would bet you he was 210 at 6'7" when I saw him that time, and I thought, God, you look awful.
Mhm.
But Keenan was the same way. Get on the bike after the game, get on the bike after the game, and I was the opposite in terms of let's lift weights and eat.
Yeah. Well, I remember
So
Muggsy, Chris Aldrich, who used to work for the Bruins. He said he had to drive the Fitrons from Wilmington to the Fleet Center or TD Bank Garden, and he'd have to put the bikes in the locker room after games, and Keenan would have the guys ride the bikes after games.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah,
saw it. That was right after he came in right after I left. I'm actually glad because I never had to. I don't know how I would have survived with somebody like him.
yeah. I got to work for a coach that was old school, and what I found was that they thought because they rode the bike after games or they rode the bike a lot, that was how to train. And we would do our VO2 max tests, and I'd tell the guys the same thing, like just deal with it for a couple of days. And we could take our VO2 max scores. The top guys are in the minor leagues. The bottom guys They're the guys in the NHL. It's your Niedermeyers, Prongers,
Yeah.
Getzlaffs, whatever. Like that's what
I showed the guys at the Bruins that one year. I said there seems to be a weight and vertical jump correlation because I remember that year Teddy Donato and Stevie Hines had made the Bruins. So I don't know what year that would have been. It would have been 90s sometime. But and they were only about 180 pounds, but they had close to 30-inch vertical jumps. And I kind of charted it out for them. I said, if you look at this kind of power to body weight ratio thing,
Mhm.
there seems to be kind of a I don't know, a ceiling and a floor. And like you said, if you look, if we had guys that were low 20 vertical jumps, they were almost all in the minors unless they were really big or really skilled. We had a few guys you mentioned. Adam Oates wasn't super powerful and Bork wasn't super powerful, but they were super skilled. They were just
Oh yeah.
they were,
Yeah.
they were among the best in the game. So they kind of threw the correlation off a little bit. But most everybody else, it was I could just look and think if we had a guy come in who was 180 pounds and vertical jump 22 inches, I would 100% guarantee you he ended up in Providence.
Mhm.
And it just, but it was a very slow process of getting coaches and management and things to buy into it. And some of it was trust. I
Mhm.
can remember Pat Burns my first year or his first year, which probably would have been maybe my fifth or sixth year because I went through a boatload of coaches when I was there. I think I worked for 6 or 7 coaches in 10 years. But I was trying to talk him out of the VO2 thing, and Pat was an old school tough guy. I loved him. He ended up being a great guy, but he was just
Mhm.
he knew what he knew. He was an ex-cop. Didn't have any kind of scientific background. He was like, he goes, I can look at those VO2 numbers and know who's in shape and who's not. I want VO2 numbers. So I remember saying to him, well, can we run versus ride the bike? He said, I don't give a shit how you get the numbers. I just want the numbers. He said, show me the numbers. And we had been doing a lot of running, so I didn't want to throw the guys in the bike and do bike VO2. So we went to BU and did running VO2s.
Hmm.
And I gave him all the numbers. And then the next year I said, Pat, I really don't want to do this VO2 thing. And he looked at me, he goes, you know what the hell you're doing? I don't give a shit. He said, just do what you want to do. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Because by then he knew me and he knew that I had a good handle on what I wanted to do. So the next year we didn't even have to do the VO2 test. We only did it once. Of the maybe he might have been there 3 seasons, but it was only the first one that we had to do it.
It's interesting you said that because I could think about so many guys who are in the minors and they're trying to make the NHL the next year, and they're going to train their asses off for that VO2 max test. Just totally not helping themselves at all. And that's one battle that you had to fight when, the coach wants to do the VO2 max test, but you're like tell the guys, hey, don't really stress about it. But they're thinking, I better get that high VO2 score or I'm going to the minors. And that's
Right. And I
yeah,
told my guys all the time, I said, they're not sending anybody to the minors because of a low VO2. I
right.
said, the day after the VO2 test, you're going to scrimmage.
Yeah.
And if you look good in the scrimmage, no one's going to look down through that number and say, he had a 48 VO2. So you're going to get shit literally the day of the test. And then after that, I remember we had Tommy Poti. Tommy Poti had asthma. Tommy Poti
Yeah.
might have been one of the best skating defensemen ever. He could literally skate laps forward and backwards at the same speed. He was crazy skilled. And he might have had one of the lowest VO2 maxes in the history of the NHL. And he would always say the same thing. I'm like, Potes, stop worrying about it. Just worry about get as big as you can, get as strong as you can. Because he was skinny. He wasn't a big guy to begin with.
Hmm.
Tall and probably 6'2". And when he came to BU, he was like got asthma, was allergic to all kinds of foods, could
Yeah.
barely eat. And it was like, Tommy, we just got to get you bigger, bigger, stronger, bigger, stronger. Go to camp, blow a 46 in that stupid test. I said, and then as long as you're the fastest defenseman up and down the ice tomorrow, no one's going to worry about the 46. And no one did.
Yeah.
Mike Sullivan always got shit for it. Joe Sacco always got shit for it. Sean McGeckran always got shit for it. Guys that had great long careers after BU, and they always got a hard time from teams that did when they were on a team that did VO2 max testing. But I guess the good thing was they had enough faith in me to listen and think, okay, this really in the long run isn't going to matter because if I'm the fastest guy, and that's why we had those guys. I mean, Jay Pandolfo won the fastest skater competition
Yeah.
one year in Albany. Sean Bates won it in Boston. we had Tony Amonte wanted in Chicago. I looked one time. I mean, Mike Sullivan, I can't find the YouTube video, but Mike Sullivan came in second twice in a row in the league-wide competition. This was before the skills thing deteriorated into like an all-star skills kind of contest. The fastest skater was literally the fastest skater from every team went to the all-star game, and then they all skated against each other.
Yeah.
And Mike Sullivan lost 2 years in a row to Mike Gartner.
Derek
But
Plant was up there too, right? Derek Plant was one of those fast guys.
later, Derek Plant was probably 4 or 5 years later, so he was in more like the McGeckran, Amonte, those guys. He was later. Sully was the first year it wasn't, because it's not even on YouTube. I try to find it on YouTube and it's not there, which shows you it. I always, it's like, Sully, it's like it never happened. And I asked him, I said, Sully, you got to have a video of that, right? Somebody had to take a video. He's looking at me, he goes, who the hell was taking videos in 1990? He said, nobody.
No, that's awesome. That's really neat. Um, yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is group training versus personal training. And for me, I always run into sometimes it's, well, we don't want him doing what everyone else is doing, and or he needs a program for him. And usually, what I'm finding now in the private industry, it's usually these kids that don't necessarily want to be in the group. Well, I think that being in the group, it brings out your competitive nature. It brings out that peer kind of, not pressure, but like that motivation from your peers. And my thing is that when I worked in the NHL, I would train the team as a team. I'd make individual modifications, but I'm like, why would I want to do this exercise with this player but not with that player when we're trying to stay
I
strong?
100%, I 100% agree with you. I've never understood it, but it's that everybody wants to be special and everybody wants to be different. And particularly if they have a kid that they think I just turned people away. I just told them, fine, if that's what you want, I can't do that.
Yeah,
I can't provide that service because I can't price that service well enough for it to be a viable business model.
right.
And I don't want to do it anyway. I used to tell people exactly what you said. I want this kid to be in a group. I want this kid to have to compete. I want this kid to look at other people. I love when people are around our girls. We
Hmm.
had a guy here, like our girls are, and you've seen our girls, but our girls are, our national team girls are awesome. And I had a guy from the Patriots come in one time, and we're doing rear foot elevated split squats, and Megan Duggan, who was our Olympic captain at that time, she grabs like 32-kilo kettlebells and she rips out 10 reps with each leg. And this guy who played for the Patriots, who's linebacker for the Patriots, had just done a set with the 28. He looked at me, he goes, I gotta stop my game. He said, I just got outdone. He said, by a girl. And I was like, yep. I said, you just got outdone by a girl. He said, you got to step up your game. And he
Oh.
went over and got the 36s immediately on the next set. But you, I mean, I want people to see like Alex Carpenter. Alex Carpenter runs AHL men's tens. Like if I put her in the group, our men's pro hockey group, she would be equivalent to our better AHL players. And so
Wow.
I think the competition part is great.
Hmm.
You have to be careful with it because I don't want it to be a competition. I don't want it to be about who's trying to beat who, because that's not the point. But I do want people to look and think, wow, somebody's doing chin ups with a 45-pound plate.
Hmm.
Maybe I can do some weighted chin ups. And I never make it about competition. I never point to people and say, oh, you got beat. I never, because again, the the better the player, the bigger the ego a lot of times. And you can lose guys and have guys who never want to lift, never want to be around because they don't like being someplace where they're not good.
Right.
So you've got to really draw that guy in a good way. And that's probably a very non-competitive way. Like sometimes I'd always look at those guys and say, hey, you're way better at hockey than him, so don't worry about it.
Hmm.
And just realize, but yet I do want them to see so they look at the obvious limitations and realize that, okay, I need to step it up a little bit. So I think you've got to balance that competitive group part. And part of that too, at least for us, we've had great guys in our groups. We've always had really good guys, really good teammates. When you think about the Mike Greers, the Jay
Yeah.
Pandolfos, and the Hal Gills and all these guys, they were they competed, but it was fun. It was never, you never had to worry about people saying, "Hey, fuck this, I'm not coming anymore because these guys
Right.
aren't good." So we had a really good group. We were lucky though in terms of I look now and think, I mean, I have had, I think, two team presidents, five general managers, five head coaches, like just from our groups, from our training groups.
Yeah.
We either BU guys or the BU guys and their friends. Not counting. I mean, like, Teddy Donato has been the coach at Harvard for 20 years, and some of these other guys that are still coaching in college. So we were really lucky to have exceptional guys to be around on a kind of daily basis.
I actually saw Greerzy last weekend or 2 weekends ago, scouting for the Sharks. Great guy.
He is.
Last one I want to ask you about, and this is kind of off the topic a little bit. I know you're always interested in you've done real estate investing, like more of you fixed up houses, right, and sold them and moved to another one. Do you still do that?
Yes,
Like
I do. I'm
how
sitting in one right now that we're fixing up, and I'm looking out across the water at another one that we're, I think, going to buy and fix up. So yes, I still
seriously,
do that.
you've been doing that for how many years? Since
Oh, God, long time. I would say I bought my first house in the 80s, maybe.
wow,
So, 2024, 25, I mean, 35 years.
wow, and
I bought a book called How to Become Financially Successful by Investing in Real Estate. And it was very typical stuff about kind of look for the worst house in the best street, look for up and coming neighborhoods, a lot of that stuff. That's how I ended up in Southie. I actually ended up in Southie by kind of by accident. I had a couple friends that were Boston cops who said you should look for an apartment over there. And then when I got over there, I realized, I mean, I wish I'd hung on. I wish I knew what I knew now, but I still did all right by it. But we bought a little two-family in South Boston, and then my roommate at that time, it was before I was married, we flipped it and sold it, made some money, bought another one, then
wow.
took a little bit more money, bought another one.
So how many homes do you think you and Cindy have lived in?
Well, more than 30.
Wow. And so,
Yeah.
like, what's the average time that you're in the house?
Average time, probably
Yeah.
2 years.
Wow.
If you said average.
I'd ask you about that because I think that's
Yeah.
pretty
Some of it, I mean, some houses have been literally a couple of months
really.
just because it was just the real estate market has been really good historically most of the time in the Boston area. So sometimes if we were smart, like we always saw, we were kind of HGTV home flippers before it was popular. And we actually fall into a category of what they call serial renovators because serial renovators live in the houses. So we would never buy a house with the idea that, oh, we're going to buy it just to flip it. We'd just buy it and we'd move into it and fix it up. And then when it looked like it was worth more money, we'd sell it.
Okay.
The difference was at that time, and I've explained this to people, when you're working for 30,000 a year, 10,000 is a lot of money.
Mm.
So if you looked at a house and thought, I can make 10 grand on this house, like for me, if I thought I could make 10 grand on the house, I'd be like, Sin, let's go. We'll sell this house. We'll find another one. And she was always pretty good with it. She kind of liked it too. She likes fixing it up. She liked the hunt and being out there and looking for
Okay.
the next place that we could fix up. But $10,000 was a third of a year's pay. So when you started thinking, okay, because some people would be like, you'd move for $10,000. I'm like, absolutely, I'd move for $10,000.
Mhm.
When you're making 30 and someone says you can move it, you have one day of disruption in your life, then you're in another house but you're $10,000 richer. And we always were good about reinvest, reinvest, reinvest. We didn't live beyond our means. I mean, we were trying to think. We were probably so Michaela was born. I was 40 before I bought a single family house.
Wow.
We had always lived, and I was probably 40 about the time we stopped having roommates.
Wow.
Jeff Oliver and people like that. And then from 50 to 60, I think I had 15 girl hockey players who lived in my house at some point or another. So I had roommates, but they weren't paying. But at that time,
Hey,
we just we were smart. We got an extra bedroom.
yeah.
Okay. Ollie was, yeah, he can live in the extra bedroom, make life easy for him. And he throws us a couple $100 or whatever for rent. per month and makes life a little bit easier for us.
Love
So
it.
we were always, I guess as I said earlier, I'm some combination of dumb and smart. So
Well, that's awesome. Well, that's been about an hour. So yeah, that's
But how quick is that, huh?
no, that's awesome. It's just great catching up with you and seeing your face and everything. And other than, a reel on Instagram or something. So that makes sense.
No,
But
it's great to get an hour to talk to you without a
yeah,
doubt.
appreciate this. Always do. And yeah, I mean, everyone knows where they can find out about Mike. He's on Instagram, Twitter. You're always on Twitter posting some good stuff. And I
I
just,
love it. I enjoy social media, so it's good. It's not a chore for me to do at all. So
yeah,
that makes it easy.
there's some good content on there. Well, Mike, thanks for your time, buddy. And this will go out in a few weeks, but look
All
forward to
right, let me know.
All
Good
right.
to talk
Thanks,
to you.
Mike. Good seeing
All
you.
right.
Take care.